Hi, welcome back to the EV Life podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, and once again, I'm joined in studio by Hannah Neal Robertson, who is our producer.
Hi, everyone.
So we have a really, I say this every episode, but I genuinely do feel like every interview is so interesting because I learn so much. And today I spoke to Shayna Rector Bleeker, who is the co-founder of a company called 7Gen. And can you tell our listeners what that company does?
Yeah, so 7Gen is a newer company that, started in the last couple years, and their whole goal is to help make fleet electrification simplified. So they are working with companies and, commercial fleets and organizations to remove any barriers they might face when they're trying to electrify their fleets.
Yeah, because, fleet adoption has a bit more considerations than just the average person replacing their internal combustion engine vehicle with an EV. And she kind of lists out the steps to electrifying your fleet. So if you are a business owner, she really simplifies what that process looks like. So it's quite an insightful conversation. And let's listen to my interview with Shayna Rector Bleeker, co-founder of 7Gen. Hi, Shayna. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Great to be here. Thanks for asking.
Can you tell me a little bit about 7Gen and what your role is there?
Sure thing. We're a, as we say, technology and EV fleet management company. What's our mission? Well, we're trying to work towards these net zero targets that we hear about through a really practical and specific path. And that is, we're trying to accelerate the successful deployment of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles and chargers. These are the last mile delivery trucks that are moving stuff from warehouses to our homes. These are the shuttles that are taking people to and from airports. And these are the school buses that are delivering our children to school, all without emissions. How do we do that? We finance both the vehicle and the charger. We install and operate and optimize those charging systems for fleets that many of which have not encountered electrical infrastructure projects, and they say things like, kilowatt. We effectively become their outsourced partner, and we've developed a software layer to help optimize all of that. There's a lot of new data from driving electric trucks instead of combustion engine vehicles, and again, we're just trying to pull that all together and help fleets, deploy clean technology that is now available sooner than they might be able to if they're left to their own devices.
So when we talk about fleet electrification, again, just to reiterate for our audience, because we typically talk a lot about passenger vehicles. So fleet electrification is sort of those medium to heavy duty vehicles, right? Like you mentioned, like school buses, the delivery trucks, sort of those slightly larger vehicles that businesses kind of use. And you mentioned that the charging is like a bit of a struggle for them. So you're also helping with that, the infrastructure.
We are.
So what type of vehicles specifically does 7Gen work with?
Yeah, so primarily we have deployed, 80% of the medium and heavy duty vehicles deployed in Canadian roads in the last few years have been cargo vans. These are the Mercedes, not Mercedes Sprinters because they haven't been available yet, but the 4D Transits or other brands like Lightning Motors or GM's BrightDrop. That's the bulk of it. That said, we did deploy the first electric Class 7 box truck in Ontario and are just about to deploy the first electric drayage trucks. So these are these big Class 8 haulers that you see go into a port or warehouse and move those big shipping containers that come to and from our shores on boats or either across our country by rail. Those are the ones we're focused on.
Okay.
Yeah, and our why is, yes, we're now seeing more and more light duty vehicles on our roads, more people driving Teslas or Kias or the Lightning pickup trucks, and that's all also good. But you and I and most of us commuting around our cities are going an average of 20, 30 kilometers a day, whereas these work vehicles that are delivering goods to our house or moving people around, they're traveling more than 100 kilometers a day. So while they're only 10% of the vehicles we've got on our roads, they're contributing a third or even in some cities, 50% of emissions. So this is our why to focus on this segment, kind of the workhorse vehicles of our economy and our cities,
Right.
and trying to support them in the transition. And we do the hard work of working with their landlord to figure out how to install charging infrastructure, how to tap into their electrical box and grid, stuff that would be a really big extra task for their fleet manager to take on.
And does 7Gen approach these organizations and businesses, or is it the other way around? Is it a little bit of both?
It's a mix of both. Obviously, in our first few years, no one knew what this little company 7Gen was. It was a lot of outreach on our account. Now, I mean, we've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. In both BC and Quebec, we've become particularly well known. Those two provinces happen to have a number of both electric vehicle and charger installation incentives, as well as starting to discuss, regulatory, as you call them, sticks. So might there be zero-emission zones like we see in London, UK, or in Amsterdam, where fleets are being charged to come into city centres with combustion engine vehicles. So that's where we're very well known. If you're thinking about fleet electrification in those places, our name will come up. And as a result, when people give us a call, others have, ordered their first few vehicles and then hit a number of roadblocks when it comes to installing infrastructure, or they've had interoperability issues, i.e. they ordered a vehicle and then they got a charger, and for whatever reason, the software in between all of these just seems to not connect. It's just creating a lot of friction for them. So after the kind of do-it-yourself mode, that's another time we often get a call.
Right.
And that's why I said at the top end of the call, right? We're trying to help a successful adoption. I don't care who does it. We just want more of these clean vehicles on the road.
Yeah.
And if our proposition of mobilizing the money, like we'll finance it up front, and also the know-how, i.e. we'll install the charging infrastructure, if that is what gets people over the hurdle, we're delighted to help.
Can you share a little bit about the deployment process? So you're helping a fleet electrify, the electrification of a fleet. What does the deployment process actually look like? What does the rollout kind of entail?
I try to distill it down, or we try to distill it down to 6 modes or steps. First question is feasibility. What vehicles do the job you need to do? Where is there a reasonable EV equivalent? And not only type of vehicle, where is there an EV equivalent that has service support and even distribution or incentives in your region? So the ones that typically work are, especially if you're doing 250 clicks a day, return to base, predictable route, those should absolutely be electric vehicles.
Right.
The second thing that folks have to think about, though, when you get into trucks and trucking is, of course, an electric vehicle battery is larger, heavier than what you see in the equivalent combustion engine vehicle. So when you're hauling loads, you've also got to think about trade-offs of payload. How much can you carry given that vehicle choice? So step one, I'd say the pinch is it's kind of new tech, it's more expensive, but the feasibility is not so bad. Next step is you got to design your infrastructure. So how are we going to get the power that's needed? Does there need to be a physical change to your site and where vehicles are parking, just to make for safe charging and close proximity to your power panels? That design piece happens. Related to that, if that's what we're designing, how are we going to pay for it? Do you have the upfront CapEx, or is a model like 7Gen going to help you where we finance it? The third step is you got to get your purchase orders in. I think we know this. It doesn't matter what segment you play in, but there's supply chain to think about, right? So get your order in, pay your deposit, and then firm up the details on that whole infrastructure piece. Step 4 is obviously install, and that's, you open up a wall, you open up the ground. Sometimes there's surprises, so just get into that piece.
Right.
Step 5, you got to operate, and that's, it's not that you install this piece, you plug something into a wall, and it's perfect forevermore. In those first few weeks, sometimes there's some interoperability headaches, right? So just allow for that startup phase, have a bit of patience. Also driver training. I've had the example of one fleet where they were driving from a suburb of Vancouver up into the mountains to another suburb, 60 some odd kilometers. And one driver kept coming back at the end of the day in a high stress mode going, I've only got 10% of range, or I've only got 20% of range. The other driver consistently came back with between 36 and 42% battery. Same route, same load. The difference, driver training. using
Right.
regenerative braking, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, there is a learning curve.
Yeah, and then last is you just got to keep optimizing, keep getting better, figure out the right time of day to charge to minimize your costs, optimize your route, all that stuff. So yeah, 6 steps to it.
Well, you mentioned that sometimes organizations will reach out to you after they've kind of hit some barriers. Can you tell us what some of those barriers are for operators looking to electrify their fleets?
Yeah, it can be everything from, as I said, on that infrastructure side. They installed what they could with their existing power capacity, so what they had in their building. And now the next step is needing to either go to their utility to get more power or to get creative with energy storage solutions, things that can, I take power in during the day and then charge overnight. So all that sort of creative design piece, that's one time. Number 2, when they've been having headaches, is it the vehicle that's the problem? Is it the charger? Is it the software? And you have someone who doesn't have deep experience in any 3 of those areas. They'll say, I'm spending too much time, chasing the OEM or chasing the charger manufacturer. I need someone to help me to optimize and wrangle the system. That's the second time. And the third one is just somebody says, we got our first 2 e-transits. They're going really well. We want more, but we don't have the budget.
Right.
Can you guys help us finance this? Convert CapEx into OpEx. Those are 3 of the times.
So you talked a little bit about the battery as well. So when a business is assessing the feasibility of going electric, one of the concerns is the payload. Are truck batteries or the batteries for mid to heavy duty vehicles, are they significantly different than the batteries we see in passenger cars?
No, they're not significantly different. It's a very similar technology. The big one is the number of cells. It could be the materials that are used in it. And I think the important thing to note with any battery, light duty or heavy duty, is that this is electrical equipment. You do need to have certified red seal folks work on these. So it's not a matter of, tinkering on your own with these vehicles. What I think is important to say is the lifetime of these vehicles or these batteries. Most of them in the medium heavy duty segment, they are warranted anywhere from 7 to 8 or even 10 years in some instances. And we're getting, and nobody's had them on the road this long, but we're getting anecdotal evidence and an expectation that they're going to have a useful life far beyond that. Mm-hmm. And even when they come out of the vehicle, they have other uses thereafter. They can be used for power storage. And at an eventual point, they can be recycled. But no, the technology is similar. There's other differences to take into account.
Yeah. I've spoken to a couple people on battery recycling, particularly, recycling the batteries that come out of electric vehicles. And it was surprising and fascinating to me that the metals in those batteries can be reused almost infinitely. It goes into your car, it gets recycled to something else, and then that battery can still be recycled. And maybe I shouldn't say infinitely, but it can be recycled more than once or twice. It's pretty interesting.
Super interesting. And I think that's a really important one to think about here in Canada. Part of our fear on the transition to EVs is we know so much of our economy, let's be frank, has been fueled from the extraction and the sale of fossil fuels. We've done very well by it. We are doing very well by this. Mm-hmm. And in my view, it's not an either or. I always think we need to use energy molecules for their highest and their best use. And there is a place and space for quite a long time still where we will and do need fossil fuels. My piece is that when we're doing transportation in and around cities and we have clean power, EVs are a great alternative. And the air quality benefits and health benefits are so material. But economically as a country, Canada is so well poised to benefit from this. Why? We have so many mining companies headquartered here. So those critical minerals required for both the vehicle production as well as the power lines and the whole infrastructure are well poised to provide materials into the space. And exactly as you pointed out, the end of life of these vehicles, the ability to recycle, reuse, and put those materials back into vehicles or batteries or into something else is so exciting.
We see the demand for, light passenger electric vehicles becoming more popular. Do you see the demand for fleet electrification becoming more popular, and how far do you think it's behind the passenger vehicles?
The fact of the matter is, we just need to be putting less emissions up into the environment. So all segments of transportation are shifting this way. Why do I think medium and heavy duty is going to really pick up the pace in the next few years? The why is because big public companies that are reporting on their emissions, in their financial reporting now, it's not just dollars and cents. It is emissions, environmental impact through things like the Task Force for Financial Related Disclosures. Mm-hmm. So that's why you have the IKEAs of the world saying we are going to have 100% of our home deliveries be zero emissions in the next few years. The why is not just because they're a good citizen. The why is because they report and their actual company results require them to reduce emissions. In some regions, this is also getting added to by, as I said earlier in our conversation, regulatory requirements. There are cities and regions that will charge you if you pollute. So again, we're kind of at that crossroads, right? Like I often bring up this analogy. There's a cleaner, there's a better, there's a more efficient technology available. We are not deploying it at scale yet because there's some friction, getting the infrastructure in place, et cetera. But if anybody listening to this has seen the early photos in New York when the first Model T4s were going down Fifth Avenue there's a picture where you see just a single-digit number of Model T4s, and like 95% of the vehicles on that street are horse and buggy. Yeah. Fast forward 10 years later, same street, same place, you see just a couple of horses. 90-some-odd% are vehicles, and that's the zone we're in right now. So it will happen. I can't tell you pace. There's a few things that we need to figure out.
Well, Shayna, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing, what 7Gen is doing. And I appreciate you talking to us. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Well, just giving listeners here, I guess you want some pretty practical tips. So I think when you ask me the battery, what's the difference? I think it's useful to close with some practical tips. So sure. Yes, this is an important part of the technology of EVs, right? So what do we do to extend the life of an electric vehicle battery? Pretty simple stuff. Try to avoid it being parked in somewhere with really high temperatures, or, so get it in the shade or what have you. That helps it. Number 2, don't charge it to 100% all of the time. Where you can, try and limit it down to 80% or what have you, just to have it be healthier. Try not to do too much fast charging. While that helps us stay on the road and do things faster, it does impact battery health. And fourth and lastly, just, control that optimal state of charge if you aren't driving it for a period of time.
All right. Thank you so much, Shayna.
Thank you again for the time today. And I hope your listeners found some use in it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Shayna Rector Bleeker of 7Gen. Of course, you can always weigh in and have your say in the conversation in the EV Life group on the AMA mobile app. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. I'll talk to you next week.